A cliche that I hear consistently in not just football, but in a myriad of sports is that Father Time is undefeated, meaning that at some point or another, you're going to have to accept the reality that your favorite football player is going to have to hang up his cleats. But there are moments where NFL players hang up their cleats so soon. As a matter of fact, so soon that often we are asking ourselves, why would they retire so early? So what's going on, guys? Mike here, back again with another video, and what we are going to be discussing today is 7 NFL players who retired in the 2010s that retired way too quickly. Now, if you want to see more lists like this, drop a like and subscribe, and make sure you turn on notifications, and let me know in the comment section down below what era we should do this video for next. Should we do it for the 90s or the 2000s? And without further ado, let's discuss Anthony Davis. No, not that Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis was drafted with the 11th pick in the 2010 NFL draft, and he was pretty good at what he did. He was an important piece of that dominant San Francisco offensive line that created space for Frank Gore and Colin Kaepernick to pick up easy yardage on the ground. He was the left tackle for those 49ers teams, and after playing his rookie contract, Anthony Davis thought it would be a good idea to sit out for a year to allow his brain and body to recover from the rigors of professional football. Honestly, that doesn't sound like that much of a bad idea, and Anthony Davis would come back for the 2016 NFL season, but after suffering a concussion in practice, AD would retire for a second and final time, and he would only play in the NFL for 5 seasons. Up next, we have Patrick Willis, yet another San Francisco 49er. Patrick Willis was the 11th overall pick in the 2007 NFL draft and was so good in his rookie year that he put up 174 total tackles and forced 2 fumbles. This proved that Patrick Willis was the future face of the Jim Harbaugh-led San Francisco 49ers defense, although Jim Harbaugh wasn't the coach at the time. He would follow up the next 2 years with 141 and 152 total tackles and would have a touchdown in both campaigns. Willis was so good at playing the linebacker position that he would make it to the Pro Bowl every year for the first 7 consecutive seasons of his NFL career. In 2012, following the San Francisco 49ers loss in the Super Bowl against the Baltimore Ravens, Willis would start dealing with a myriad of injury issues. On August of 2013, Willis would fracture his hand in training camp, and he would make it back in time for the start of the season, but then he would injure his groin in week 3 and would make it to the Pro Bowl in spite of this. But things would only get worse in the 2014 NFL season, as Patrick Willis would once again be hampered by a toe injury. He opted for season-ending toe surgery, and after struggling with this toe injury, Patrick Willis would announce his retirement that spring in March 2015 at the age of 30. This is extremely rare for a player of his caliber who was putting up the statistics that he was putting up. I personally believe that the reason Patrick Willis decided to retire so soon was that he saw that the San Francisco 49ers were headed for a rebuild and didn't want to sacrifice his body if it wasn't for a championship. Now, if you think that's crazy, get a load of this. And this isn't an exclusive 49ers list, by the way, but I just had to mention this here. There's another middle linebacker that you guys might know of. His name is Chris Borland, and this is an incredible story. It's extremely fascinating because Chris Borland retired extremely young after showing tremendous promise in the NFL and having only played his rookie season. After one season, he had 107 tackles and 2 interceptions after starting 8 games. He played significantly more games in his rookie season because another member of this list, Patrick Willis, was dealing with a toe injury. So get this, Patrick Willis was dealing with his toe injury, Chris Borland comes in to take his snaps, and plays really well. He seemed more than capable of picking up the slack when Willis was out, but what was shocking is, after the season, Chris Borland would literally retire the day after Patrick Willis retired. It's almost as if Patrick Willis influenced Chris Borland to retire after his rookie season. When Chris was asked why he wants to retire so soon, Borland cited his concern with head trauma and the risk of CTE not being worth the money to play football. Borland's retirement was extremely significant, as it was the first time a promising NFL player had the opportunity to make a living in the NFL, but was rejected due to the concerns of the harm that would befall upon his body. Chris Borland would have to pay back the $460,000 of his signing bonus and would pocket about $140,000 from his rookie season. Not bad, but still extremely odd. Up next, we have DBrickashaw Ferguson, and not only does DBrickashaw Ferguson have one of the most awesome names in NFL history, but he's also one of the most underrated players in NFL history. He made it to the Pro Bowl during the years that the New York Jets were considered an AFC championship contender in 2009 to 2011, which is 3 times, but if he was playing on a winning team, he would have received more Pro Bowl selections without a doubt. Ferguson was the number 4 overall pick in the 2006 NFL Draft and played his entire career with the New York Jets. During the 10 years that he played, DBrickashaw Ferguson would never miss a single game in his NFL career, making 160 starts without missing a game. He would also play 10,707 out of 10,708 regular season snaps during his career. Ferguson would retire on April 2016 at the age of 32, and he without a doubt had more in the tank. I feel like his story is very similar to Patrick Willis, as Ferguson really didn't have much to play for. He already accomplished a lot of player accolades, and there was no hope of winning a Super Bowl. He was already fairly financially stable, and the New York Jets were in the midst of a rebuild, so he retired. Up next, we have Andrew Luck. And out of all players to have retired on this list, Andrew Luck was the absolute most heartbreaking retirement. In the 2011 NCAA season, Andrew Luck would make his meteoric rise above draft boards. He had a tremendous football IQ and was able to memorize plays quickly. He had beautiful throwing mechanics, he had a great GPA, and he went to Stanford. He was mobile, but his game didn't depend on his mobility, and he just seemed to always make the right play. Andrew Luck was seen as the most sure thing to come out of the NFL draft since John Elway. And Andrew Luck was so good that he's the only player that I know that was projected to be the number 1 overall pick in the extremely deep 2011 NFL draft, then returned to school, and then became the number 1 overall pick in the 2012 NFL draft. Most players that return to school get absolutely decimated by scouts, but not Andrew Luck. It only took Andrew Luck 3 years to show us his true potential, throwing for 40 touchdowns and over 4,700 yards in his 3rd year. And even in his final season, Andrew Luck would not only return with a brand new throwing motion as a result of the injuries he sustained, but he would almost replicate those numbers with 39 touchdowns at 4,593 passing yards. The thing that destroys me about Andrew Luck is the absolute mismanagement of one of the most transcendent talents in NFL history. His story almost resembles that of Archie Manning, a player who would get sacked way too much in his career, and this was apparent in Luck's entire career. He averaged about 40 sacks a season for his entire career, and the Indianapolis Colts wouldn't get him help until his final year, in the form of Quentin Nelson, and an offensive-minded head coach in Frank Reich. This would help Andrew Luck take less hits, and Frank Reich did a wonderful job. In his final season, Andrew Luck would only get sacked 18 times. But by then it was too late. Andrew Luck retired right when the Indianapolis Colts looked like the absolute best team in the AFC and a future dynasty. A lot of people aren't aware of this, but the Indianapolis Colts had a phenomenal young defense that they compiled by drafting excellently and an extremely efficient offense. But on top of all of that, they were one of the few teams in NFL history to have a ridiculous amount of cap space for the future. But the damage was done, and Andrew Luck retired, and to be honest, I blame the Indianapolis Colts. So stop me if you've heard this one before. A transcendent offensive weapon gets drafted to the Detroit Lions, puts up remarkable numbers, then retires because the Lions were so terrible that it made him dislike football. 7 years after the retirement of Barry Sanders, the Detroit Lions would be in position to draft one of the most remarkable wide receiver talents that we have ever seen, Calvin Johnson. During his first 2 seasons, Calvin would tease us with his potential, but once the Detroit Lions drafted Matthew Stafford following an 0-16 season, Calvin Johnson would consistently put up 1,000 plus yard receiving seasons, and he almost came close to a 2,000 yard receiving season as well. It was actually comical how much Matthew Stafford would target Calvin Johnson, and it wouldn't matter if he was double covered. Calvin would come down with the pigskin more often than not. Calvin Johnson would make it to the Pro Bowl 6 times in his career, and in total he would rack up 731 receptions for 11,619 yards in 9 seasons. Calvin would then retire at the age of 30, citing that he lost his love for the game and the injuries were taking a toll on his body. What bothers me the most is despite carrying the entire Detroit Lions offense for a whole decade and the Lions not being capable of putting a good product on the field, the Lions made Calvin Johnson pay back $1 million of his signing bonus once he retired, which is extremely petty and a phenomenal way to alienate a legend that devoted his entire career to your organization. Over the last 5 years, there have been rumors of Calvin Johnson making a return to the NFL, but that appears unlikely now that he's 35. And to end this video, we are going to discuss the most recent player that has retired way too early, and that's Luke Kuechly. Luke Kuechly was probably the greatest linebacker of the past decade. The Carolina Panthers were an absolute force with Cam Newton leading the way on offense and Luke Kuechly captaining the defense. He is one of the smartest players in NFL history and was a 7-time Pro Bowler, a 5-time first-team All-Pro, and the 2013 NFL Defensive Player of the Year. What made Kuechly so dominant was the ability to not only tackle in the open field, but he was incredible in pass protection as well. In 8 years in the NFL, Kuechly put up 1,092 combined tackles, 18 interceptions, and forced 7 fumbles. Kuechly opted to retire following the 2019 NFL season at the extremely young age of 28. He didn't provide any specific reason as to why he would retire other than vaguely referencing that he believed it was the right thing to do. He came extremely close to winning a Super Bowl in 2016 when the Carolina Panthers would meet the Denver Broncos in Super Bowl 50, but they would inevitably lose in Peyton Manning's final game of his storied career. Are there any players that you believe were left off of this list? Furthermore, what players do you think we should include in our future list for the 2000s and the 1990s list of players that retired too early? I'd like to hear what you have to say. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mikerophone, and I'll catch you guys in the next upload.